Hello and welcome to our weekly Torah Talk. Our guest today is Rabbi Sharon Brous, founding Rabbi of Ikar. Hello, Rabbi. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Our Parsha is Chukat, in which there are many topics for possible discussion. The red heifer, Parah Aduma, and its meaning, the story of the brass serpent, the miraculous well that provided water to the people of Israel, the battles against Sichon and Og, the Amorite kings. And after 40 years in the desert, the people begin to prepare to enter the land of Israel, as the last of the desert generation have all to die. In our Parsha, two of them actually die, Miriam and Aaron, the brother and sister of Moses. Let me begin by reading the first pasuk, and then we can discuss the meaning of the death, which I think is interesting. זאת חוקת התורה אשר ציווה אדוני לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ויקחו אליך פרה אדומה תמימה אשר אין בה מום אשר לא עלה עליה עול. That's the first topic of the parsha. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, this is the statute of the Torah which the Lord commanded, saying, speak to the children of Israel and have them take for you a perfectly red, unblemished cow upon which no yoke was laid. That's the first topic, but I would like to move to the topic of Miriam and Aaron. What's really the role in the Torah and in this parsha?
It's so significant, I think, that Miriam and Aaron both die in this parsha. It is in some ways, it kind of captures the beginning of the closing chapter of the 40 years of the journey in the desert. So the first thing is that 38 years actually pass in the empty space between the end of chapter 19 and the beginning of chapter 20. So this Parashat Chukat actually encompasses in it 38 years of sort of empty space. We don't know
in
what
which
happened.
Nothing of any significance happened.
Or we have to only imagine and fill in the white space. I mean, The first thing that happens when we come back to the narrative is Miriam's death, and Miriam in particular was in some really extraordinary character in this narrative, because she's the person who, even as a child, we know that Miriam is in some way responsible for the redemption of the people. When she was a little girl, 5 years old or something, so Amram and Yocheved had split because they knew that they couldn't have a child, or Pharaoh would kill the baby, and she's the one who, as a little girl, convinced her parents to come back together and try to have another child, because she sensed the redemptive possibility that would emerge from them. And so here's this person who, even as a young child, had a sense of a bigger narrative for her people, and was willing to use whatever persuasive techniques she could in order to bring other people along on this journey, who later obviously then follows baby Moses and makes sure that he's protected and cared for, and then becomes this prophetic voice as they're walking through the desert for all of those years. And I think her significance is she somehow captures what it means to be both invisible and visible at the same time. I mean, a woman in a position of such significant leadership, who at the end of the day is best known not for her leadership, but for her lashon hara, for her, somehow disparaging the wife of Moses. And so it's a really interesting role that she plays. And what we see in this parsha is that when Miriam dies, so the water ceases to flow for Israel, which of course brings about the next greatest drama for the people, Aaron and Moses's mistake or offense with the water. So clearly there's incredible significance to the life and also the death of Miriam. For Aaron, also really complicated figure, somebody who in some ways the most significant moment of his life was the moment that he essentially abandoned God and Moses when Moses was up on the mountain and builds the golden calf. And yet what he's best known for is being Radef Shalom, that he's the ultimate pursuer of peace, and the person who knew how to sort of navigate and negotiate between warring parties, but really a deeply flawed character, and someone who shows us what it means to persevere and to persist in the face of really terrible tragedy, and to continue to build a life of meaning and purpose afterwards. So both of them leaders, not only in the sense that they stood at the front of the people, but really extraordinary and very complex characters in our narrative.
Right, and as we get to know that they both die, we also get the news that Moses is about to die, and he's about to die because he's punished by God. And this punishment, whenever we get to this parsha and I read it with my children, they get really angry at God for punishing Moses so severely, for essentially doing not exactly what God tells him to do. He instead of speaking to the rock, he's hitting the rock with his stick to get the water to flow out of it. Why such severe punishment?
Yeah, look, your kids are right to be angry about this and and to feel a sense of that this is really unjust. But let's look at it for a minute together. I mean, there's so many different interpretations about what's actually going on here. The rabbis have, often I always think when there are 1,000 answers to the question, it's because we're essentially admitting that there's no answer, right? We don't understand why it would be that after all of these years of incredible frustration and incredible devotion on Moses's part, and real patience, that we can't permit him a moment of impatience, right? Even God has moments of impatience. Why can't we permit that to Moses? So Rashi says, as you said, it's because he struck the rock instead of speaking to the rock, which seems like a pretty excessive punishment,
right?
If that's the case. Some say that it's because he hit it twice when he, instead of just hitting it once. In other words, it came from anger. Ramban said that his flaw was that he could have used this moment to inspire faith in the people, but he didn't inspire faith, and instead it's almost as if he took credit for the miracle himself.
Well, that's when God speaks to him. The only explanation we get from above is, he tells him, "Since you did not have faith in me," that's the explanation.
So is it Moshe's lack of faith, or is it that he didn't instill faith in the people, in God? And I mean, either way, it's problematic. But I would still say an excessive response or a punishment that doesn't really fit the crime. I'm very moved by Rambam's understanding of what happened, which is he argues that what's actually going on here is that Moshe's reflecting a deep anger and frustration, which indicates to the people that God is also angry. And so here's the problem with anger, because you think he should be allowed to be angry every now and then, right? But actually, the people are justified in asking for water. People deserve to have clean, healthy water to drink, then and now. And I think part of the problem with this narrative and part of the problem with Moshe's leadership and why the punishment seems to be such a stringent punishment for a sin that doesn't seem in the scheme of things like such a big deal is because at this point in his life, after all of these years of frustration and it doesn't know as a leader that the people have a right to advocate for their own basic needs to be met. And he doesn't foresee that there's going to be a problem when their own basic needs are not being met. So when there's no water, as a leader, he should be out in front of the problem and say, my people are hungry. We need to find a solution to this problem. And not only does he not stand out in the front of the people, but when they actually engage in this holy kvetch, right? This holy articulation of what their core and basic needs are. My children are hungry. I need to feed them. We need water in order to survive. And instead of him responding, saying, you're acting like God is angry, and for that, God says, you've lost your ability to lead the people. You're no longer in the front of the people, and you're not even standing behind them in the right way. You, as a leader, you have to have an open heart, and you have to see where your people are hurting and be able to work to address that pain. And he's no longer effectively working in that way.
And thinking about it, it was basically better for Moses not to go into the land of Israel, right? His legacy seems much larger when he stays in the desert while the people go into the land of Israel.
It might look, the cynical way of looking at it is he dies with the dream unfulfilled, but that means that it still sits in its perfect form. And we all know once you actually cross the border, how hard it is to actually make your dreams, make the reality match your dreams. So on one sense, yes, he ends up better off having died on the other side of the border. But I also think it's so crucial to the narrative arc of the Torah altogether that we start in the beginning of the book of Bereshit. We start in Gan Eden, in this place of utter perfection, and almost immediately human beings are exiled from the Garden of Eden, and we essentially spend the rest of the entire Torah trying to make it back home. Right. In some fundamental way, but we don't ever get there. And that's the power of the continual narrative of the Jewish people. If Moshe had made it back into the land, the story would be complete, right? We're sent out, we go on this long, tumultuous journey, and we land back at home. Right. But instead, we land almost at home. And Jewish history for the next 3,000-4,000 years is about trying to take the last step to get home, and knowing that we're not actually reaching it, and hoping in every generation, hoping the next generation will take us home.
Rabbi Brous, I hope we can do this again.
I would love to. It's
Thank
nice
you,
to
and
talk.
Shabbat Shalom.